So essentially what we're talking about here, solid column lifting versus air conveyance. So solid column lifting is essentially when you throw your hose down into the product into your septic tank without allowing any air into your system. That is different than what air conveyance would be, where actually you're using air assisted with vacuum to push your product up into the tank. So what we're going to do here is, I got the first question here. If your hose is fully submerged in the tank while pumping, are you pulling product into your tank, or is the product being pushed into your tank? So raise of hands, how many people think that the product is actually being pulled into the tank while you're pumping, if your hose is fully submerged? No one? All right, what about, is it being pushed into your tank? No, all right, tough crowd here. The right answer is actually the product is being pushed into your tank. What we have working for us here is atmospheric pressure. Atmospheric pressure essentially is, the atmospheric pressure at all times is 14.7 psi, pounds per square inch, at sea level. That is what's pushing on us at all times. Every part of your body is being held down by atmospheric pressure. That's essentially why we're not floating like we do in space. So what happens with atmospheric pressure is that atmospheric pressure is also inside your vacuum tank. So when your tank is sitting empty without any vacuum inside it, essentially what has happened is there's 14 pounds per square inch inside that tank that is allowing nothing to flow into there. So what happens from there is that once we start and we turn this truck on and we start pulling a vacuum on our tank, essentially what we're doing is creating a negative atmospheric pressure inside that tank. So at any given time, as we pull down in there, we are actually removing the atmospheric pressure out of that tank. So what happens is the external atmospheric pressure is what's pushing down on the product and actually forcing that product up into the tank, because there's no atmospheric pressure on the tank side pushing that product backwards. So that is why we also have a limiting factor, and that's why without air we are limited to what essentially what the atmosphere will push into our tank. So at 20 inches of vacuum, what happens here is that we are at, let me see, oh, you can't see that. At 20 inches of vacuum, essentially on the interior of your tank, there's only 5 psi left inside that tank, which means essentially there is 9.7 psi external force pushing down, which pushes that product up into your tank. So that's why vacuum level is actually crucial in this fact that, the deeper the vacuum we go, the less external pressure that's pushing back against us as we're working. So if we go down to 27 inches of vacuum, we only have 2 psi that's actually pushing back against us, the force, as we're trying to pull that product up into the tank. So that's why vacuum level is crucial when we're talking about, solid column lifting, because essentially the atmospheric pressure inside the tank is working against us, and we are trying to eliminate that atmospheric pressure inside the tank for it to work with us. So for every inch of vacuum that you pull inside your tank, essentially what you can do with a solid column of water is you can pull 1 foot up out of the ground. In this, it's a little deceiving, but for every inch of vacuum, you can pull 1 solid column foot of water up. So at max vacuum, at 30 inches of mercury, which is max vacuum, you can essentially pull 30 feet, or if you want to be scientific, it's about 34 feet out of the ground. So if I'm out there and I'm pumping a septic tank, here, let me see, let me pull this down. Oh, where'd that go? Here's my first grade drawing right here. So essentially what happens is that, and this also goes from the standpipe. So from the top of your tank right here to wherever your standpipe is, unless you're loading from the bottom of the tank, but we're going to just say right now we're loading from a standpipe. That standpipe is roughly 10 feet off the ground. So already we have 10 feet of lift we have to overcome before we actually even start pumping down our liquid down here. Once we get to, say this is another 10 feet down from the top of our liquid. So essentially from there, we need 20 inches of vacuum on our pump that's over here before we can actually start pumping this product down. And as you start pumping it down, your product is going to start relieving and it's going to start going down in the tank. So as it goes down, that 10 will become 12 feet. That 12 will become 14 feet. And the further we go down, the higher the vacuum level that we're going to need to actually pull this product up into our tank. Now let's go the other way. So instead, say you don't have a standpipe inside your truck, what we're doing is essentially what you're going to need is we are going off the liquid level inside your tank. So whatever your liquid level is inside your tank to wherever your surface is, let's just say that's 5 feet. And now we're another 10 feet down, which gives us 15 feet or 15 inches of vacuum. We need 15 inches of vacuum essentially before we can actually start pulling this product up into this tank. As that product rises inside the tank and we start pulling up, that 5 will become 6. That 10 will become 11. So as we start going deeper, we are going to need more vacuum to overcome that. And that is going to be on the vacuum side. That is straight solid column lifting. That is not injecting any air into the system itself. So essentially what happens, that is our limiting factor. Where'd my PowerPoint go? Sorry about this. So essentially vacuum is our limiting factor when we get to that. Say I get up to a job here and I got 20 feet of elevation in another tank that's 10 feet down. Well, I need 30 inches of vacuum before I can even start pumping that tank. 30 inches of vacuum is perfect vacuum. That is essentially unattainable. That is outer space. That is no atmospheric pressure whatsoever. So at that instance, we need to start relying on air to help inject into the system and push that product up into our tank. So now that being said, we also have to work on the elevation. So for every 1,000 feet of elevation we're at, down here we are roughly 700 feet of elevation. So for every 1,000 feet of elevation, you lose 1 inch of vacuum. So as we go up, here it's not going to be as much of a factor, but say we're in Colorado. As we go up in the mountains, we get up to 3,000 feet of elevation, 4,000 or 5,000 feet of elevation. Essentially, the most vacuum you can pull on your system if we're at 5,000 feet of elevation is 25 inches. And that's a huge limiting factor because now at 25 inches of vacuum, perfect vacuum, we can only pull 25 feet down in the ground without using any air assist. So how we overcome that is essentially by air conveyance. Air conveyance is what we have come to know as being the way of pump in this day and age. What we sell now is probably, we manufacture high airflow vacuum or high airflow blowers. So our blowers produce, our number one selling blower is roughly 980 CFM. So it's very high airflow. And what happens is that airflow allows you to stay in that high vacuum range along with assisting air into your stream without sacrificing the vacuum inside your tank. So what happens here is that we're going to have a snorkel air injection system. This is one way that we can get air into our line. Yes, sir? Oh. Huh. I was talking to myself up here. Thank you. Why is it not? All right, here we go. All right, so this is what I was actually just talking about, the elevation. So as you can see in this chart here, maximum elevation at 10,000, say we get up to 10,000 feet, we're at 20 inches of vacuum is our max vacuum we can pull at elevation. Essentially, that means that you're not going to pump very deep in the ground without being able to use air to assist that product up into your tank. So this is what I was talking about here. This is what air conveyance is. You mix air with your product. So as you're pumping, you're pulling air with the product at the same time, which alleviates and it takes away your limitation or your limiting factor of the atmosphere pushing against you. So as we start pumping, we get our hose in the ground and we actually start injecting atmospheric air into it, which allows that product to assist up through that hose and pull that product up into your tank. So instead of the atmosphere just pushing that product into the tank, what's happening is the atmosphere is still pushing the product into the tank, but we are also using air injected into the system, which then pushes that product even further. So at elevation, say we're at 10,000 feet of elevation again, max attainable vacuum is 20 inches of vacuum. At that point in time, I'm able to actually overcome a huge drop in elevation. Say I have a 20-foot run, or a 200-foot run at 20 feet of elevation, I can still pull that into my tank by using airflow and vacuum at the same time. That 20 inches of vacuum with my max attainable vacuum is no longer a limiting factor because now I have a high airflow blower which is helping assist that product up into the tank with airflow. I wish I could show this video, but let me see. Because this video essentially shows that. So what I'm going to show you here is it's without volume. Wait a second. It's without volume, but essentially what he's going to show here in this video is let me get to it. So what they have going on here, they have a shop vac that's hooked up to this hose and it's submerged in water. Again? Why is this not? I don't know. It's not working. All right, we're back to ground zero. All right, we're just going to stay here. All right. Essentially what the video was showing is that this guy has a vacuum, a shop vac, and the max obtainable vacuum inside the shop vac is 15 inches. So this guy's holding a hose and he's got his product submerged down in the water. With this, he's got two separate holes that he's drilled right above the water column. And what he shows is that when he turns this vacuum on, the max obtainable lift that they can do is about 5 feet of lift before that water actually stops lifting into the tank that he's made for this. So what happens is that because that is their max limiting factor, there's no way for them to get that product into the tank that they're trying to pump to until the guy takes his finger off the hose and there's a hole there which then starts injecting air into the stream, and then you see this product start to actually flow into his tank. So what he's doing is he's using air injection into the airstream, into the product, which then pushes that up into the tank. And as you go, you can play around with this stuff, and you can drill more holes, you can use less holes, however you go. So the next slide here shows essentially how you can do it very efficiently. Some people are Some people, they use a garden hose and they'll throw it in the back side of right underneath their hose, going back up into their product. So when they push that down, when they put that down in the tank here, essentially what you're doing is you're sucking air and it's going through that hose and it's getting picked up and it's pushing that product back into your tank rather than just using pure vacuum. So that's how you overcome deep pulls in a system there. So if you're running out, 200 feet of hose again at 20 feet of elevation, you are able to overcome this by injecting air into the airstream, or into the product stream, and push that product up into your tank. All right, here's a couple examples here from some guy. All right, this guy says, I've seen posts about whether a blower is worth it or not and how well these work, how well these air lifts work. 2,100 gallons up to 200 feet with 30 to 40 feet difference in elevation. It took 40 minutes to pump out 2,100 gallons. In my opinion, if you're building a truck, blower is the only way to go. Airlift works great. Time is money. And so what he's saying here is he was not essentially able to do this with his previous truck efficiently. By going up and using a higher airflow blower, he is essentially being able to maintain the vacuum inside his tank and use airflow to assist that product and push it up into the tank. Here's another one here, 170 feet of hose at greater than 40 feet of elevation. This picture doesn't do any justice on how deep this really was. Tank was 20 years old, never been pumped, fully on both sides, pumped it in 50 minutes without a cheater pipe. Sold on my MV blower, never went over 220 degrees. So essentially, he's using that extra airflow that blower provides to maintain vacuum in his tank and to inject air into the system, which pushes that product up into the tank. The problem is if your vacuum pump is undersized for what your tank is, if I have a 300 CFM pump on a 4,000 gallon tank, essentially what happens is as soon as I start gulping some air and using that air assist to push that product into the tank, what happens is my vacuum level starts dropping inside that tank. When my vacuum level starts dropping inside the tank, my pounds per square inch, again, my 14.7 PSI that's pushing down on me and pushing that product, helping push that product into the tank, is now working against me. So that your pressure inside the tank is now starting to work against you because you're losing vacuum inside it. So by being able to use a higher CFM blower or higher CFM vacuum pump on a larger tank, it helps you maintain that vacuum along with being able to use air assist in your system to push that product in it without dropping off. Whereas if you have an undersized pump, essentially that vacuum level will drop off inside there, and then that will be working against you rather than for you. So here's a good way, and a good way to do it here is what we call a stinger. So essentially what you can do is you can get yourself a 6-8 foot piece of PVC pipe, or however you want to do, Schedule 40 pipe. And what you can do is you can drill a hole up here, and it's going to want to be above your product. So no matter what, wherever you drill this hole is, it's got to be above wherever your tank level is going to be, and you cannot submerge it below it. So by doing this, essentially it works for you. So you don't have to sit there and work your hose and go in and out of your product to obtain that airlift that you need. So by putting this in, you can put this directly in your tank and have that pump work while you go grab a shovel, while you go grab whatever you need to do. This thing will be pumping without having to sit there and work that hose back and forth every time. Now the problem is if your pump is undersized, then you're not going to have enough airflow in that, or you're not going to have enough vacuum maintaining in that tank to be able to drill a hole in here and actually use the airflow to push that product into the tank. So by having a right size blower or right size pump to your tank size makes all the difference in the world. Here's another example right here. So essentially what this guy did, he put 2 cam locks in the system, and then he put a little ball valve in here. So as he's working, he's able to adjust the airflow that he's putting into his product. So depending on what size pump you have, you may actually have to use, a smaller orifice, because if you start getting too big of a hole or you're injecting too much air, your vacuum level inside your tank can start falling off. You want to maintain that vacuum level the most you can without having your airflow drop off. Now, something to consider with this is that if you are going to make a stinger, the one thing I can tell you is do not put a 90-degree elbow on here. Whatever you do, do not put a 90-degree elbow. If you put a 90-degree elbow and you get to that tank bottom and you start sucking a bunch of air and rock, that rock is going to come up here and it is going to blow through that PVC pipe. As you can see in this picture on the right-hand side here, and as you see the picture on the left-hand side, there's actually someone standing over that 90-degree elbow right there. If that thing comes up through there, that is a very dangerous situation, and that's not something you want to be on the receiving end of. So here's an example right here from All Centex vacuum pumping out of Austin, which I do a lot of work with down there. They were out there cleaning out a water jet table, and when they were cleaning out the water jet table, there's a lot of metal pieces and shavings in there. That metal piece went up through their system and punctured a hole in the top of a brand new tank. So it went right through the deflector plate on the right-hand side that you can see, and it actually punctured a hole directly in the top of the tank. And they actually had a thickened tank. Their thickness was, they paid for a higher grade thickness on their aluminum. So now what they use essentially it's armor plate they use up on their baffles just because of this. And they're running a 4310 blower on there, so that's about 980 CFM. So that's essentially what airflow can do when you get product or anything else, or when you get rocks in it. That's why it's very dangerous. You got to make sure you respect that. So if you're making a stinger out of PVC pipe, whatever you do, do not put a 90-degree on there. Even a 45 is somewhat questionable in my opinion, but absolutely never a 90-degree elbow on that. So I'll give you a little example here. A guy calls up the other day, he's out of Washington. He says, I got 2 trucks. He said, I got 1 truck, brand new truck, and I just put this bigger pump on it. It's a 500 CFM pump. And I got this second truck, it's an older truck. This truck has a 300 CFM pump. Why is my 300 CFM pump pumping better than my 500 CFM pump? The situation was that his vacuum reliefs that he had in the system, his new tank was set to 20 inches of vacuum, whereas his old tank was set to 24. All this gentleman was doing is putting his hose directly in the product. When you put directly in the product, 20 inches of vacuum compared to 24 inches of vacuum, we're only working with vacuum levels. We're not using airflow at that point in time. When you have your hose directly submerged in a product, it doesn't matter if you have a 100 CFM pump or you have a 5,000 CFM blower. 20 inches of vacuum is 20 inches of vacuum. You're not using airflow to actually load that product into your tank. So, at this point in time, I tell him what he needs to do is, 1, go down on vacuum level. Increase your vacuum level on there, get down to 24 inches. Because most pumps out there that are rotary vane pumps are achievable up to 24 inches of vacuum without having an overheating situation. So what I tell them, get it down to 24 inches, and the next part is make yourself a stinger, drill yourself a hole in there, and get some air flowing through this thing. The airflow through this is essential when you're pumping. That helps you load that product at a much easier rate than what it would be if you had that thing fully submerged and have to sit there and use that hose back and forth and work the hose. That thing's still up there. Get close out. So this was a pumping job I did up there with Envirovac. They're out of Shreveport, Louisiana. They were doing a lift station. They have a 900 CFM blower on their truck. And what they're doing here is they're sticking their hose down their product, or they're sticking this hose down the tank, but what they're doing is they're actually leaving that hose about an inch off the surface of that product. Because these blowers are so powerful in the airflow, essentially what they're doing is pure air conveyance. They're not even sticking that product in there because they're already past the limitations. This is already at, I think, about 24 feet. So even if they wanted to use vacuum for this, essentially it would be rendered useless, because at 24 feet, I would need at minimum, 28 inches of vacuum just to start pumping it. Because at that point in time, I'm going off my tank level. So essentially, with having this higher airflow blower, they're able to use that to their advantage by putting that hose down and essentially leaving it right off about inch above the surface of this, and allowing that product to convey into your hose rather than trying to submerge it and using atmospheric pressure to push it up. And that's why, this day and age, the blower market and everything else is so lucrative, is because these blowers work for you. The high airflow works for you. All I can ever tell you is do not undersize your pump when it goes on a tank. If you're seeing that it's going to cost you a couple grand more for, twice the CFM, don't hesitate, because that airflow is essential to helping you load these tanks much more efficiently than what the old school way was of actually working that hose in the product in and out. This day and age, you can use that. It maintains your vacuum on the tank. You can still inject air at the same time, and it creates, a much easier work environment.